Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. It's with Bruce Brenneise, who is making his debut in the upcoming Infinity set, but is certainly no newbie to the art world. His signature landscapes have landscaped the landscape of fantasy illustration for years. And his creativity is diverse, unlike, say, the previous sentence where I used the same word as a noun, a verb, and an adjective. It sounded better in my head.
You didn't rehearse this at all, did you?
Life is not a rehearsal. All the world's a stage, and players only love you when they're playing. That's William Shakespeare's Macbeth. So, no, I didn't rehearse. But what I did do is get Bruce on the line for a lovely chat. So let's jump right into that now.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure. Okay,
so you have a very, very, illustrious career. I mean, you're new to magic, but you're certainly not new to art. What was the first, and I love asking this, what was the first paying gig you got as an artist that was substantial, that made you think, this could be a career for me?
Well, I mean, I'd certainly approached it as possibly being a career for quite a long time in my life. And I actually have had a working illustrator in my family. So unlike a lot of people, I actually had that kind of example to look to. The first job that I actually got was illustrating the poster for the Seattle Turkish Film Festival.
Wow. That's an interesting job to land.
Very random. I actually had some experience with Turkey in the past. That's where I did my semester abroad in college. And at the time, I was an ESL, an English as a second language teacher in Seattle. And one of my students was a Turkish student who was there. You know, he was working towards his one of his post-grad degrees, I guess. And he knew that I had this love of Turkey and Turkish stuff. So, and he knew that I was an artist. So basically he put me in touch with the organizing committee and helped me get that job. And yeah, that was the first one. That was a pretty fun one.
So you've been to Turkey. I mean, you've been to a lot of different countries, it seems like, from what I understand.
Yeah, I think I'm at around maybe 34 countries at the moment.
That's nuts. I mean, not nuts in a bad way, but just like the mind, the amount of traveling you have to do.
Yeah, I really enjoy travel, and it's a big part of the inspiration that goes into my work as well. I've lived in China, as I said. I lived in Turkey for a little bit, and I've just every opportunity I can to go and do world travel, I grab it, and it's been kind of killing me that during the pandemic it just hasn't been possible. So I'm really looking forward to whenever I can travel again.
Right, and you spent an extensive amount of time in China, right?
Yeah, I was living there for 6 years.
Now, what is an aspect of living in China? Like, what's one aspect where you say this is clearly cooler than the U.S. versus another example of saying like this where the U.S. is cooler? I'm interested to see what kind of
how it stacks up. I would say, I mean, street food culture is a big thing there. Like, you know, you just go out on the street and there's all sorts of small vendors making a variety of tasty treats. And I mean, certainly China's not the only place with that kind of culture. A lot of the developing world tends to have that. But that was, you know, really, really cool thing that we just don't have here in the same way. And as far as things that are better here, I mean, I was always fighting to get good internet connections to all sorts of sites outside. So, you know, from the inside, the Great Firewall is no joke. Even trying to use various workarounds, ways to try and worm through it, it's difficult, and they're constantly making it more difficult. So that was no fun. And when I decided, okay, it's time to go back to the States and work towards that art career I've been wanting to have, it was kind of a no-brainer that I had to leave China at that point to make it happen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is it true? I read that that they very much watch what's going on the internet, like as far as what people are looking at. Is that a true, or is that just a falsehood that gets perpetuated?
I would definitely say it's true. Obviously, they can't watch every last thing. So a lot of it has to do, I mean, they pay a lot of people to keep tabs on what's going on. They've got kind of, it's called the Wu Mao Dang, the 50 cent army is kind of like they're paid, sometimes I guess you could say they're paid trolls, but for the most part, they're more like paid moderators, like thousands or tens of thousands or just like a huge number of people basically being paid to interact online, keep tabs on things, try and shunt discussions away from sensitive topics, or call in moderation to basically delete a thread or a subject if it's treading in areas that the government doesn't want. So yeah, there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes there.
Mm-hmm. So when you came back to the States, what was the first steps that you took to get yourself onto the art career path? What were some of the things that you focused on that got you there?
Well, first of all, I moved to Seattle. I grew up in Michigan, and there's just not all that much going on in Michigan. I mean, you can certainly freelance from there, but in terms of, I was 6 years past my art school degree. Like, my connections to the art world had really kind of lapsed, and I didn't have a lot of connection to the career or to the entertainment industry that I was interested in pursuing. So moving to Seattle, where there's a lot going on, was a big step. As mentioned, I just picked up some a day job working as an English as a second language teacher, and then I started just working on my skills, because they'd gotten a little bit rusty. I'd done a little bit of art while I was in China, but it wasn't really my main focus while I was there for a lot of the time. So I was, just reading all the tutorials that I could, reading blogs, reading, like Muddy Colors and Gurney Journey and some of those other ones that really cover a lot of fundamental skills and a lot of tips, and just working on personal pieces and working on some fan projects that were related to some of the Sierra Online computer games that I grew up with. So I kind of did some art in connection with that particular fan community to try and practice. So that was the first steps, I would say.
And so, was that now? I read that you ended up doing a mentorship with Jeremy Jarvis, correct?
No, Jeremy Jarvis was the art director who dropped in on one of the Smart School mentorships that I did. So I actually did two Smart School mentorships, one with Donato Giancola and one with Dan Dos Santos. And Julie Barrow was the drop-in, sort of guest for Donato's class, and then Jeremy was the drop-in at the end of Dan's class.
Okay, so they just come in and they sort of give you like a sort of advice on what it is that you should focus on, things like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a drop-in art director portfolio review kind of thing that Smart School tends to do, like like in the last or the second to last meeting of their classes. Every single class will have someone who is really embedded in the industry, who potentially either hires artists or helps artists sell stuff, in the case of Julie, and can give some feedback that has like a really strong practical component, from the perspective of the hirer, as opposed to the perspective of a fellow artist like Dan or Donato.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, when did you get? Now I'm going to mispronounce this because I've never had it spelled out. Numenera is that
Numenera?
Numenera. Yeah. I knew I was going to butcher.
No worries.
You've done an extensive amount of work for them. I mean, it's incredible how much work you've done for them. I mean, when you did the first project for them, did you realize it was going to be something that was going to be so a huge part of your catalog?
Yeah, I've done something like, I want to say like 43 pieces for them probably over the years.
Yeah.
It was certainly kind of love at first sight. When I was first working for them, I actually wasn't working directly for them. I think I had found out about that setting just poking around online a little bit before, but a friend put me in touch with Loan Shark Games, and they were making an adventure card game they were licensing the setting basically, and any art that they commissioned for it they were sharing with Monte Cook Games, who owns the setting. So I actually did 10 pieces for them, and then I ran into one of the main designers at a local convention in Seattle, and he put me in touch with their art director, and then the rest was history. It was a great match as far as my artistic sensibilities and interests and what they were looking for.
What would you describe your sensibilities and interests as, if you were to do so?
Weird landscapes is the is the 1 second pitch. I love alien landscapes. I love world building. I love coming up with different, just kind of like weird ideas about what's possible with a landscape as far as that goes. And I had been sort of developing, a personal project for, starting years before, actually, when I was in Turkey. That was kind of a post apocalyptic weird setting that was very Numenera esque. And I mean, this was like back in 2005, so like well before Numenera was like ever publicly a thing. So when I came across that setting, it was just like, okay, this is a perfect match for where my head was already at as far as what's possible in that kind of setting.
Yeah. And but what's interesting though is you have somehow, I mean not somehow, but you managed to fit in just wonderfully with Magic the Gathering, and maybe at one point in time with some of the things that you've done, like but they've always fit in. But like it's interesting that your newest pieces, at least the Shocklands for the unsets, they're so strikingly different, yet they fit in just the same. When did you officially get the job with Wizards? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, let's see. I just got an email from Don Murin, like literally right after the pandemic hit the US. So this would have been like around March or April 2020. I think Emerald City Comic Con had just been closed down, and they decided they weren't going to do it because the pandemic was hitting. So everyone was scrambling to figure out what they were going to do to as artists to make money that year. And I got a random email from Don just being like, hey, would you like to work with Wizards on Magic? And I'm like, well, yes, definitely. This is an email I've been wanting to get for a while now. So that was early in 2020. And then there was, I think the original plan actually was they were wanting to get me for a full cycle of 10 lands cards. Things changed a lot behind the scenes, so it was a while before they actually got around to getting me those cards. I did work on one other card for the set earlier, like in July, and then late in the year they finally got back to me like, okay, like we've got these Shocklands, how many do you want? You've got like not a whole lot of time. And I'm like, well, okay, I guess I could pick up like 4 or 5. So they gave me 4 cards, and I was disappointed not to get like more as they'd been talking about, but the cards I did get were pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And one that's not a Shockland that I did along with the 3 that they've actually shown. I'm pretty excited about that to see how that does as well, though, when they finally reveal stuff. So there's going to be a few more Unfinity cards that I've got coming out soon.
Is that the original stomping ground behind you?
Yeah, so I've got the prelim painting
Wow.
behind me. Yeah. So
And
I kind of wanted to start working in traditional a bit more. Obviously, there's a huge collector market for
yep.
magic art, and so compared to some of my other clients where the collector market isn't as deep, I can actually justify trying to transition some of my process to traditional. So I did start doing basically like a refined drawing and then a rough prelim painting as part of these pieces, just to help. I guess basically to get back into traditional and to try and figure out, where it sits in my process, and hopefully in the longer term, transition it to being more of a part of my process.
Every magic artist I talk to or is primarily digital then gets into the game and they realize, oh, okay, this sort of changes things with the market, the art market. I mean, it's literally unimaginable not to consider it at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, and it definitely feels like a win-win. I mean, I love working digitally. There's a lot about it that I enjoy. So, I do foresee it remaining a large part of my process for the foreseeable future. I don't know if there'll come a time eventually where I'm actually doing the finish in traditional and then, making any last minute, fixes digitally or whatever. But like, I really genuinely do enjoy working digital and have always been an early adopter with that. But at the same time, I have enjoyed traditional over the years. I used to do a lot of like figure studies. I used to go to the conservatory that Kieran Yanner owned in Seattle and do costumed figure studies and things. And that was I always did that work traditionally. So it's cool to have a way to kind of bring some of that back into my process and see where the marriage of the two sides can occur.
Is there no way for you to like say set up like, I know this is sort of like it wouldn't be exactly the same, but like say like a person models over Zoom and you can do a figure study of them, or is that just something where it's too removed?
I certainly think that's possible. I'm pretty sure I've heard of some models doing that. Feels like it does change things a bit though. Like it's just not the same as working from the model directly.
Right. Because you can't
So
see their
it's
pores and the way that the shadows fall, that kind
right.
of stuff.
I mean, not that I'm like examining their pores per se, but like there's just a certain, I don't know, that the camera flattens things out to a
Right.
certain degree. So it isn't the same, and you can't like adjust your seat just like a few inches in one direction because you're like, okay, this is almost what right, and I need to like, get a stronger sense of the form, or the shadows are going to look a little better, from this angle.
Now, had you played any Magic before you worked for them?
I have never played Magic.
You never played Magic?
I actually, my one connection to the game, really preceding all of this, is I bought a booster pack of, like just a little tiny pack back in like, I want to say like 1995 or 1996. I was just at the Toys R Us or something, and I was curious about it, and I'm like, oh, cool, like. This is some cool art, but I was pretty removed from the kinds of people and the kinds of places where I could actually play anything like that back then. Small, like rural, kind of religious town that frowned on fantasy type stuff.
Right.
So, I admired the art, and that was, and I think it came with like a little newsletter magazine that had like some cartoons and some fun stuff that was all about magic stuff. I remember they had, oh, what was it? They were like reimagining magic in a variety of different other genres, and they had one that was like a detective comedy that was like Sarah Angel and Oi the Troll. Is like, anyway, so it was some fun stuff. That was my first and really my main connection of any sort. And then in more recent years, I guess my approach to magic has just been through my love of the art of magic and the artists. And I'm friends with many of the artists. I mean, I mentioned Julie, like she was one of my first contacts in the industry.
She's wonderful. She really is.
And she's just she's such a lovely person. And, like I was just coming from China and everything, like I said, I had no contacts. Like it all shriveled up and dried away. So I had to rebuild, and so I started going to the Crab Jab Gallery openings, so that I could meet more people in the industry, as they often would show up to those. And I got to know Julie, and I got to know a fair few other artists by attending those events.
Now, as far as inspiration goes, I know that you Terry Pratchett is one of your big influences, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, he's one of my favorite authors.
Yeah. And so, like, do you think that his, like, maybe the way that he writes has influenced how you do your artwork, or is that something that happens when you kind of go at that? Like, I mean, is it something that's completely separate?
I mean, I would say that I've read very widely in fantasy and science fiction, so I would say there's a lot of influences. I mean, he's certainly a big one as far as just his outlook on the world and life. In terms of world building, I would say probably not as much. I'm more influenced by some of the authors who are imagining like alien worlds and ecosystems and how those things would functionally work. Um, so there's a lot. It's really about connecting the kinds of places that I've traveled to and the experiences that I've had with the experiences that I've had through books and games and films and such.
Who would you say is one of the best? I mean, I'm one of the best world builders. I'm sure. I mean, obviously Tolkien comes to mind, but who are some people for you that you think, okay, this person is just, they created an entire world?
I mean, Brandon Sanderson is kind of one of the big examples these days because he seems to be like a fairly methodical world builder, and I mean that's certainly what kinds of sets his work apart from many of the others. Like it's definitely not loosey goosey. Okay, here's what I need the plot to do, and then we figure out how to get there with the world building. Like it feels like he comes up with world building concepts and really figures out, okay, here's the playing field, and then separately there's the plot and there's the story he wants to tell within that, and he figures out how the two go together. So yeah, definitely.
One of the things that I was noticing is there sort of a recurring theme. I'm looking at, I believe the piece was called, let me pull it up. It's Titan's Dream, or Dream Titans is the one I'm looking at.
Trail of the Dream Titans. Yeah.
Trail of the Dream Titans. And then following a few years later, you did a piece called Liminal Migration. No, I mean, I'm ignorant on if whether or not I mean, I know one of them was done for a certain project, but like, where did that idea of these walking pyramids come? Was that something that you had been kind of like messing around with, or was that connected? Were both pieces connected together?
They do have a connection, although they are for completely separate projects. Trail of the Dream Titans is the first one, and that one just came about. That was actually my very first piece, or my second piece, that I was doing for Monte Cook Games for Numenera. And the brief was, give us 4 weird landscapes. Whatever you come up with, like whatever design. There was no direction as far as where it had to be or what it had to be. It just had to be weird landscapes that could be in Numenera. I was part of the marketing push. They were doing a Kickstarter, Numenera 2, where they're sort of reimagining their setting books. And so I just had to come up with blue sky concepts, just, whatever I could come up with. So that was one of the ones that I came up with. And I think the genesis of it was just, okay, what if pyramids and other large structures were just the shells of giant Lovecraftian eldritch creatures?
It's freaky deek for sure.
Yeah, so the story kind of built from there, and then it actually, once I had some rough sketches to show, then they kind of had some feedback of like, okay, well, since this Kickstarter push is really about imagining how players can build settlements, or settlements can exist in this weird place called Numenera. Maybe there's a little town here, and how does the town interact with this creature? And perhaps it's like semi-symbiotic in some fashion, or they're able to get something from like the chemicals that are leaking out of this creature have some purpose for these people that are kind of surviving in its shadow. And then, yeah, years later, I actually had another client come along. He was an electronic music maker, and he was looking for album art. And
Right.
he saw the other piece, and he's like, I really liked that one. Is there, I don't even recall if he was wanting to license it or what, but licensing wasn't really a possibility in that case. So I came up with something similar for him since he liked that one so much. And I was like, okay, well, what else could I do with this concept? Is there anything else that I have to say with it? So that one was inspired by the first one pretty directly.
And did it end up becoming the album art for, what was the name of the album?
Let's see. I think it actually. I mean, yeah, it should have been Liminal Migrations, because we
Cool.
came up with that name together. I actually crowdsourced the name on Twitter. I was like, okay, what does this bring to mind to you guys? And then I looked through all the options, and I sort of mixed and matched until the various concepts that people threw at me, until I came up with something. I'm like, okay, this name kind of fits and sounds like something that would be great for an electronic album. So
So
the guy's name is Blue Tech, and
okay.
yeah, and there's an album out there with that art.
And so you actually got to be part of the process of naming the record.
Yes.
That's cool.
So yeah, it was a nice collaborative effort. He was great to work with as far as that goes. Yeah.
Now, you do a lot of landscapes, and we'll get to the magic arts eventually. But I think in the background of you, is that the painting you did called "If Stones Could Cry"?
Yes. Yeah, that's probably my favorite piece that I've done so far in my career.
Now, is that, I was looking at, but is it it's from a series of reimaginings of the Frankenstein monster, right?
Yeah. So I was working. Part of that project that I mentioned, the one that was sort of Numenera like, that I had been thinking about since way back when I was studying in Turkey, and so that's sort of post-apocalyptic world. And one of the short stories that I wanted to share from it was sort of reimagining Frankenstein's monster if he were an experiment that had been left behind in that world, when basically humans just had wrecked the place and left. So he's abandoned there, and that series is really about the processing of abandonment. And I always thought that was a major part of the Frankenstein story. So that's kind of how it all married together. There was also a project that I was part of with some artists, where we were going to reimagine a bunch of different Gothic horror, like Dracula and Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde, or Victorian horror, I suppose it would be. And the project never really came together, but I decided to go ahead with my part of it anyway, and just ran it as part of my Patreon, something to do as part of that world building that I was doing there.
Yeah, they're really heartbreaking. The paintings, like you really get a sense of loss that this poor creature is going through.
Yeah, I got to dig into some emotions for those pieces for sure. Yeah.
And same with let me see, the painting you did, that it was called the fall of the face of Gone.
Face of Gan. Yeah, that was actually, that was my very first Numenera piece, the one that I did for the company that was licensing from Numenera before I actually got to work with Monty Cook Games. And so that one actually was a place that had been described in their setting book, but they'd never illustrated it before. And so I got to bring that one to fruition. But yeah, it's just kind of this random ruin with a giant face that's staring out into the ocean.
But it's a very like it's a very like despondent, very sad face. Like
Hmm.
even as the light is shining on this face, it's not doing anything for its sadness. It's almost defiantly sad in a way against the sunlight. Um, and that leads me to my point of that, where it's like you do, you know, obviously you're very good at landscapes, but your character work is fascinating stuff. Where did you come up with the idea for the painting that you did called The Feeding?
Oh, the feeding was, I think that started out as just a random concept. I think I was working, or I was doing a class. I'm trying to remember if it was schoolism or CGMA. It might have been one of the Nathan Fowkes classes that I took, and we were just supposed to work on creating thumbnails of concepts and generating ideas. And so that was just one of the random ideas that I generated, that I then developed further. And I started thinking about, okay, what if, we have a lot of different ideas about what a vampire is, right? And we often think of them as horrifying abominations or as sex pot creatures. And I thought, well, what if we explore the maternal side of one of these creatures of the darkness instead? And so we have this kind of maternal vampire creature, and the narrative is a little bit, it could go either way. Like, on the one hand, maybe she's
Mm-hmm.
just like feeding on this baby, but really what I wanted to suggest there is more to do with, that she's feeding this baby, not feeding on this baby. She has fed on, other people in this house, but she is actually feeding this baby. And I built in a lot of references to the concept of birds, and how so her dress is actually reminiscent of like a magpie's coloration
Right.
and things of that nature. And so that was kind of the narrative
Yeah.
that built up around it.
I mean, I first when I first saw it, I thought, okay, I kind of my you know your sort of gut reaction is to think, oh dear Lord, that's a vampire and a baby. And then you look closer at it, and you realize the baby's got blood on its lips too,
Yeah.
which is sort of indicative of the fact that this is a baby vampire. And I was and because I'm not bright enough, I didn't think to myself, well, because I wondered where she had the blood, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, she's got to eat, and then obviously the baby's breastfeed. I mean, if you were a vampire, right, you're going to breastfeed. Is probably going to be
Well,
right.
my the connection to it's a little grosser than that, actually, because it's, again, the bird connection. How do birds
Oh,
feed their young? So she feeds and then she regurgitates some to the
hmm.
baby. So that was my solution for that particular issue. And also, if you see the full piece, there's like a hand grasping at her skirt. So there's a sense of like she's come into this house and just fed on someone.
Oh, I see it now. Oh, there we go. Yep.
So it's also not entirely clear if, like, she is basically snatching this baby, and, she has a maternal instinct that she wants to, she's fed on the parents possibly, and that she's not going to just like leave this baby to die of exposure in an empty house. So she's going to basically make it a vampire at that point.
That's sweet
Uh,
of her, isn't it? That's
there,
considerate.
Right. So there's a few different variations on how this could go, but it's definitely one of those pieces where I'm like, I was very proud of how it all came together, and then I take it to conventions, and some people are super into it and other people look at it and recoil. And one of my friends was like, well, yeah, I mean, it's a vampire eating a baby, so what did you expect? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's how some people are going to interpret it. That's
Yeah, yeah. Well,
understandable.
That's how you want people. I mean, I think that's a sign of a successful piece of artwork. If you have people that are either going nuts over it or people who are
Yeah.
horrified by it, because whatever the case may be, if you're getting a reaction that is that intense, then it's working as
Oh
a piece
yeah.
of art, right?
Yeah, I definitely feel it was very successful as far as art goes. It's interesting because it was really the last piece that I did before I took a pretty decisive turn away from doing character focused pieces for the most part. I mean, the Frankenstein stuff aside, but even that is really more told through the landscape with the character as a secondary aspect. So that was the last of that, and then I was like, okay, well, my focus as far as events and portfolio goes is now really all about the landscape. So I can dabble in that. It's just I don't tend to encourage clients specifically to come to me for character stuff because there are people who are more into that than I am.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when you got the assignments for the Shocklands, like I'm curious to know what the like the assignments say, like what the descriptions say. Like for instance, Godless Shrine's fascinating to me because I don't again I know you don't play Magic, but there is sort of it calls to mind a card in Magic that's very well known called Damnation
Hmm.
that is got a black sun that's sort of obliterating everything. So like what did the description say when you got it, and where were the sort of the blockings for you as an artist? Where did they come from?
I mean, it the brief did not specifically call back to that previous magic art. Um, Now that I know more about it, like I mean, even before I had the cards coming out publicly and could have people tell me, oh, this feels like a callback to that. I had come across that like after I'd done the pieces, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's like a connection to something within the game here. As far as the brief, like it really it's asking for something austere. It's asking for a clash of light and darkness. Something that's very dramatic. Um, Kind of both dramatic and austere, like without looking at the brief in front of me at the moment. That's my main recollection of it. They were all of the Shocklands did require having we had to have a spaceship in there that was kind of like the connecting theme that outside of the main action of this particular set, which is happening with this astrotarium like traveling carnival thing. We have these sets where people are going and exploring the wider universe around it, and so that's really what the Shocklands are accomplishing. And then we have these retro futurist spaceships coming into the scene. So I really just wanted to figure out an elegant way to incorporate that, and so have these people in their little spaceship going by, and they're witnessing this very dramatic event that maybe no one else in the universe is witnessing. They're getting to be there at this special conjunction of light and dark.
That's some fascinating that you mentioned it, because now looking at it, like for instance, Stomping Ground is it's a blink and you'll miss it. It almost appears like it's part of the actual like horizon, but only if you look closer do you see the spaceship sort of teetering off to the
Yeah.
side.
Yeah, and the thought that I had with Stomping Ground is, okay, like these guys were down on the surface and had just like, minutes of warning that there's this shower of meteors coming down on their head practically. And as one would in that situation, you're pretty shaky. You're like dodging around and through these things and maybe having trouble with the ship, getting it all like, you know, uh, set to properly take off and get out of there, get the hell out of Dodge. So that was basically the mood that I was trying to create with that one. And I think the brief didn't actually specifically ask for that. I thought, okay, well, we have to have the spaceship. what's the narrative going to be there as far as like a secondary read, because the main thing is the meteors are going to smash this place to oblivion.
And he snuck it in very well in the breeding pool. And I'm interested to know the story behind breeding pool. You hinted at it. There was an original rendition that was racier that you toned down. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about how the original went?
I mean, I would say it's not that dramatic of a difference. I made things a little subtler in the final, just because I wasn't really trying to tweak Watsy,
Yeah.
with this. Like I didn't want, like we have our orders as far as like where things are supposed to fall on the spectrum, and it's like sort of PG-13ish, right?
Yeah.
So I just thought, it's such an opportunity of sorts. We've got this card called Breeding Ground, and this set is a little bit less serious than many because it is an unset. And so there's an opportunity to do that thing that artists are always sort of accused of, and in some cases have done with like even things like Disney, where they snuck in like a
Boner.
a boner or something of that nature. In this case, it's actually appropriate in a way
Right.
to sneak in that sort of stuff, because it's an alien ecosystem. Who's to say what it all looks like? It could all have these sorts of sexual connotations, and that's just the way it looks. But also, it is a literal breeding ground. Like under this pond, I just imagine there's like all of these, one-eyed snake creatures like writhing and having the time of their lives down there. And there's like a whole alien ecosystem. So I had plants in the background that are like, there's some that are like tentacles, to kind of call out the whole like hentai, sort of thematic, like cliche, I guess, about tentacles. And then you've got these sort of more yonic symbols, like the sea anemone looking plants that look like vaginas, more or less, or like vulvas.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the creatures themselves, which literally like a one-eyed snake. They're practically, they're basically, it is what it is. you
That's
know,
good.
so yeah, so there's all of these callbacks to that kind of like juvenile humor, I guess, as it were. But at the same time, like, I did imagine this whole like alien ecosystem, where these creatures are breeding, and then they at some point in the process they also become more like a plant, and they become rooted and stationary, and then become more like a lily. And then the lily, when closed, looks a little bit like a peach. So there's another call out. So like there, it's just this connection between the juvenile humor, visual humor side, and then also the alien ecosystem side of it, and it
I
all
mean,
kind of connects around the idea of breeding.
I always used to joke with my friends when we were playing Magic that so many of the lands' names just felt like they could be slang for
Like innuendo.
Yeah. I mean, you got stirring wildwood, or or creeping tar pit. I mean, you can't fetid heath. You can't not laugh. I mean, it's like it's
Right,
sort of just
right.
like, I mean, and you can't go wrong with Aunties Hovel.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that anybody did this on purpose, but like we would always joke and be like, "How's your fetid heath?" And it's
Right.
like, "Well, my Mystic Gate's doing just fine today." But to bring things back to sort of a little bit less incendiary, but still incendiary nonetheless. I am curious. I couldn't tell if you were joking or not. But it's Big Trouble in Little Brighton. So you wrote on the description that, is it impolitic to mention that the client for this indie movie poster skipped out on me? Can you tell us more about that? Was that something that actually happened, or was that
Yeah.
so what happened there? I mean, are you allowed to
Yeah, I mean,
Talk
I,
about it.
I'm I, I'm not under any sort of obligation or NDA to this guy. I mean, I'm not gonna say his name or anything, but he was just like an indie movie director. He had like maybe a few films under his belt, and he was looking for this piece. He wanted to create, like a movie poster, but also something that would help him sell the idea of the film to investors. But his main issue, I think, is that he really didn't have much of a directorial vision. And he was just very wibbly wobbly on everything about it. And he was basically what he really should have been hiring was a concept artist to just
Mm.
do a whole bunch of iterations, not an illustrator who's going to find, okay, here, what's the optimal solution here to illustrate your idea. um, and I didn't have a million years to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on it, so the whole thing ended up collapsing. But what's interesting is I was working on this piece when I attended the illustration masterclass in 2017. So I literally had the best in the business. I had art directors like Lauren Panapinto and Mark Sheff. I had artists like Donato Giancola,
Yeah.
Dan Dos Santos. I had Greg Ruth, like all of these amazing artists, like some of the best in the world, over my shoulder, giving me advice on how to do the best possible job I could with this client thing. And even that was not enough for this guy. So I feel very vindicated in that I gave him 120% and he wanted like 500% basically. And so at the end of the day I had to cut it loose and be like, look, like take it or leave it at this point.
And
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 he
did
left
he
it.
did he skipped out? I mean, meaning skip when you say skipped out, like I interpreted that as that he didn't fulfill, like he didn't pay you, or is that what?
So typically with most clients, I'm asking 50% upfront and 50% on the back end. And so he didn't pay the back end. He paid the 50% upfront, and that was basically the kill fee.
And that's so that is that common for people to like not pay the 50? I mean, is that or is that something that somebody does? It
I
seems like
mean,
that's
it doesn't really suit anyone to do it that way, because if he doesn't pay the second 50, he has no rights to use it for anything.
right.
So he can't legally, use that for if he made his film or whatever. Um, so no, it's not typical at all. I would say, like, most, unless you're getting some real red flags right off the bat with the client, it's typically both sides are genuinely trying to do their best to make a project work. And so most of the time it works out. That was a rare case where it didn't. And, I think that he had some incorrect expectations going in, and we weren't able to communicate that like earlier in the process. And so it just, unfortunately it just didn't work out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wish him all the worst, but
I mean, to be honest, I wish that he would find his directorial vision, and the next artist that he works with on whatever project in the future, I hope he's not wishy-washy. I mean, like, one of the things he said was basically like the worst thing that you could hear as an artist. I'll know it when I see it. And it's
oh
like, that never works out. Like, come on. As you know,
no,
as the artist or as the client, like, you have to be able to commit to a vision of some sort.
right.
And there's going to be some iteration along the way, but like most of that iteration, if you're hiring an illustrator, should be happening in the thumbnails, the color comps, like that stage of things. You should have it all figured out by the
Yeah.
time you hit the
Yeah.
final, and you shouldn't be like, oh well, I need to change all of these elements around, and then again and then again. At that point it's very clear, like, no, this isn't going to work out.
I mean, I know it when I see it. I'd be like, "You're the director. You need to be it needs to be seen. Like you should have saw. It's this should be passed. It's like
Yeah.
you can't be just farting your way through it. Nobody burps a movie, dude.
Right, exactly. Like by that point, like, I mean, I read the script that he had, like he had, or I guess I don't know if it was the script per se, but like, whatever
The
it was that he
treatment.
had, the treatment, the draft, like, you should know what you've got if you're getting to the point where you're trying to sell it to investors. At
Well,
that point, you should know what you're trying to do.
especially if he's the director and the writer. I mean, like
Yeah.
that you would think that out of every type of if you're going to be an auteur, most of those people that are successful are like they have an idea of what it is, almost to the point of just like where they're immovable. Like it has to look a certain way. Like this is the way it is, and they would never leave the creative control up to somebody else as a means of. It's also. I mean, that's
just it's just unfortunately he just didn't have the qualities that were needed in that situation.
Like talent or drive. No, just kidding.
So hopefully he finds them, but I'm happy to not work with him again.
Well, I can't blame you for that. So now, from what I understand, you are going to be at least from what I read, you are going to be there's more cards coming up in the upcoming set, the upcoming unset. Do you have anything that you're working on for Magic that I know you can't do specifics, but are you coming up on any other sets that you are allowed to talk about?
I mean, since they've revealed what sets are going to be out in 2022, I can certainly say that much. I believe I've got I want to say it's like maybe 16 cards in total that are going to come out in 2022, assuming everything goes to plan and nothing ends up in the slush pile.
I don't think.
And I'm really hoping, fingers crossed. But yeah, I should have a total of 16 cards in 2022. I've got a couple cards already for 2023, I think, and like 7 of them are for Unfinity. I've got some cards I'm really excited about for Baldur's Gate. I've got a few cards for Dominaria United and Brothers War. I think I was actually really, unfortunately, I was really busy during when they were working on Brothers War stuff. So I think I've only got 1 card for that. I was working on some stuff. I've got some stuff for D&D that I was doing that I was really excited about. That I was working on right around the same time. So there's only so many ways I can split myself. And then I had a whole series of conventions that I did in the fall. So that further made it really a very busy time.
That's great. I mean, your stuff's awesome. And it doesn't surprise me that you're going to be you're obviously going to be in many more sets to come. So, but if there's anything else is there anything else you'd like to plug that you would care to talk about that people could, maybe get more information about you, like your Patreon, things like that?
Sure. I'm fairly easy to find, I guess. My name is a unique one, Bruce Brenneise. So you can find me, Bruce Brenneise, on patreon.com. Like I said, that's sort of my personal world building project for the most part. Also some behind the scenes stuff about other projects that I do, including the stuff for Magic, including the piece I recently did for the illustrated edition of the first Witcher book. So lots of cool behind the scenes stuff there, and you can find me on all the social medias and stuff. I think I'm Bruce Draws on Twitter, and brucebrenneise.com for my main website, and all the rest of that.
Well, that's awesome. So, I thank you so much for taking the time for this again today. It's been great talking to you.
My pleasure. It was lovely to talk with you too.
I am personally very excited to see the Unfinity set. It has infinite possibilities.
Unfinite?
Unfinite. What did I say? Why is this so hard?
Because you didn't rehearse?
I just gotta put on some makeup. So. How did that look?
Like it was rehearsed.
Hoisted by my own petard. Bye-bye.